You wake up with a sore back. You sit up comfortably on the bench you used as a bed. After a short while, you get up to dumpster dive for some tasty grub. You check the Domino's dumpster because you like their cookie brownies. But sadly, the garbage man already grabbed it. So you check the McDonald's that's half a mile down the road, and to your shock, there is a homeless man stealing all of the Big Macs. So you do what you do best. Have a classic bum fight for that sweet and tasty Big Mac. You've trained boxing in the past, so this homeless man was light work. After giving him the classic 1-2 right down the pipe and rightfully getting that tasty dumpster Big Mac, this burger gave you the energy for you to train in MMA. Fast forward a few years, and now you are a star with a ton of adoring fans. You are Bobby Green, and this is the Casual's Guide to Paddy the Baddy Pimblett versus Bobby King Green. Let's take a gander into the career of Paddy the Baddy Pimblett before we look into the career of the King, Bobby Green. Paddy Pimblett hails from Liverpool, England. He trains out of Next Generation UK. Paddy is currently entering his physical prime, being only 29 years old. But let's rewind to the very beginning of his career. A young Paddy had 2 amateur fights when he was just 16 years old, winning both fights in the first round and beating both of them by submission. In 2012, a 17-year-old Paddy Pimblett would make his professional debut against Nathan Thompson, and Paddy would show out in spectacular fashion, getting the submission in the first round. In Paddy's second fight, he showcased his fantastic jiu-jitsu by landing and completing a flying triangle choke just 2 minutes into the first round. After that fantastic fight, Paddy switched it up and knocked out his opponent, Jack Drabble, only 21 seconds into the first round. Paddy was becoming a local star after 3 finishes in the first round, all less than 2 minutes and 10 seconds in. After this fight, he got the attention of the biggest European promotion, Cage Warriors. And in his Cage Warriors debut, Paddy would fight Florian Kane, and this would be his first fight to go to the judges. However, Paddy dominated this fight and won by unanimous decision. In his second fight in Cage Warriors, Paddy was matched up with Cameron Else, but this fight did not go as planned, losing his fight in the first 35 seconds in the first round by anaconda choke. After that humiliating loss, where Paddy got exposed for being way too reckless, he would fight Martin Sheridan and beat him from pillar to post, winning by unanimous decision. After getting back in the win column, Paddy would fight Conrad Hayes and get a finish in the first round, beating Hayes by triangle choke just 3 minutes in. Paddy's confidence soared after this fight, and he would fight a few months later when he got matched up against Stephen Martin, and he would beat Martin by technical knockout due to a doctor stoppage in between rounds 1 and 2. About 6 months later, Paddy would fight Kevin Petchy in a different promotion called Full Contact Contender. Paddy would show out in spectacular fashion with this switch, beating Petchy and Miguel Harrow by submission, both of them losing by rear naked choke. After the Harrow fight, Paddy would go back to Cage Warriors and fight Ashley Grimshaw. Paddy would keep this win streak going after beating Grimshaw by unanimous decision. Paddy was riding high, and it didn't end there. Paddy would fight with Teddy Violet and sink in a nasty rear naked choke in the second round. After going on a great 7-fight win streak, Paddy got his first title shot against Johnny Farche, and Paddy would get his third technical knockout in his career, just 1 minute and 35 seconds into the first round. Paddy would then fight a fighter who is currently in the UFC in his first title defense, that fighter being Julian Arosa. This was a huge test for Paddy, and Paddy would pass this test with flying colors by beating Arosa by unanimous decision in his first fight to go all 5 rounds. Paddy was riding high with his belt and was an English star at this point. He was young, entertaining, and seemingly improved every fight. Paddy got his first UFC contract offer after winning this fight and going viral for throwing up on the canvas after the fight during his interview. But Paddy told the media that he was not ready for the UFC and he wanted to sharpen his tools a little bit more. It's hard not to respect the honesty, but his title aspirations needed to be tested once more. And he would fight Nad Narimani, but this fight didn't go his way, and Paddy would lose his belt in a 5-round fight, being dominated all 5 rounds, and he ended up losing by unanimous decision. After this very bitter moment, Paddy would take 9 months off to recover and focus on getting better on the feet. And he would fight Alexis Savadis, and this is where Paddy would land another nasty flying triangle choke, and this brought the Paddy hype back, and the UFC was still paying attention, offering him another contract due to his stardom and his impressive finishes. But Paddy said that he wasn't a proper lightweight yet, so he rejected the offer. He was respectful, saying that he just wasn't ready for it. But it wasn't a matter of if he would fight for the UFC, it was a matter of when. So later, in 2018, Paddy would get a title shot against the champion Soren Bach. This was a huge test for Paddy, but Paddy did not end up getting the job done. It was a hard fight, but Paddy ended up losing by unanimous decision. After losing the third fight in his career, Paddy was down on himself, but far from giving up. After all, he was the promotion's biggest star, and kids around Liverpool and all around England loved him. So Paddy didn't give up, and he would fight Decky Dalton, and Paddy would knock out Dalton just 2 minutes into the first round. A year later, Paddy would fight David Martinez, and once again, Paddy would get the finish in the very first round, less than 2 minutes in. At this point, Paddy was 26 years old, and he felt ready to join the biggest MMA promotion in the world. And 6 months later, Paddy would fight in his UFC debut against Luigi Vendramini. This was one of the most hyped up debuts the UFC has ever seen. The media was interviewing Paddy, and it was getting a ton of views. Fans were talking about if he could be champion eventually, and how he would fare with the top fighters in his weight class before his debut even happened. So when the day came to walk the walk, Paddy showed up and showed out, knocking Luigi out 4 minutes into the first round. A lot of fans were hyped, but some fans saw holes in his striking, because while Paddy did knock out Luigi, Paddy did almost get dropped with a huge left hand. So fans were split, but still optimistic about Paddy's potential. And in March of 2022, Paddy would fight Rodrigo Vargas, and in spectacular fashion, Paddy would sync up a tight rear naked choke and force the tap in the very first round once again. Jordan Levitt called out Paddy, and the fans were fascinated with this matchup, calling it the zestiest fight in the promotion's history, because Jordan would twerk and Paddy would shake his hips and do the jazz hands. The hype behind this fight was massive because Jordan was a good wrestler and Paddy was great at jiu-jitsu. They chirped back and forth, saying the loser will either get twerked on or teabagged. Paddy would end up teabagging Levitt after getting a rear naked choke and forcing the tap in the second round. The fans laughed, but the fighters showed respect regardless. His next fight was when the public opinion would switch. Paddy's opponent was Jared Gordon, and this was Paddy's toughest fight by far. Paddy would get tagged with a huge shot time and time again, and Paddy would land his own shots, but didn't get the same reaction. However, Paddy would still win this fight once the scorecards got read. Fans were quick to state their opinions, saying Paddy was gifted the win because they felt he obviously lost. On top of the fans thinking Paddy should have lost, Paddy did himself zero favors by saying that he obviously won and that it wasn't even close. He has retracted this recently and says it was much closer than he initially thought, and that he felt humbled after rewatching it. But Paddy was still undefeated in the UFC, and he would fight a fan favorite and legend, Tony Ferguson. Tony was on a 6-fight losing streak and should have retired long ago. So optically, this wasn't good for Paddy. People felt Paddy was beating up an old man, and that narrative never changed because Paddy ended up winning this fight by unanimous decision. Paddy showed respect and humility to Tony Ferguson, and this was a 180-degree turn from his past fights. Some fans liked it and some fans called it fake. Personally, I think he was humbled from the backlash of his previous fight with Gordon. Paddy's record currently stands at 21 wins and 3 losses. Paddy has 6 knockouts, 9 submissions, and 6 decision wins, putting his finishing percentage at 71%, which is pretty good, and Paddy has 1 submission loss on his record, which was his first loss, and has lost 2 fights by decision. And now he's fighting a legend of the sport and another fan favorite in Bobby Green. And we will now take a gander into Bobby's long and famous career. Bobby Green is a man who has faced many trials and tribulations in his career. With him being 37 years old, he is on the last few years of his career. Bobby comes out of the Redlands, California, and trains out of Pinnacle MMA. He has 49 fights under his belt, and we will go through the majority of them, but let's backtrack to the very beginning. Bobby didn't have a single amateur fight, having his first fight be in the professional setting. Bobby would make his professional debut in 2008. He would face off with Neil Abrams and would get the knockout win in the third round. His next fight was just a week later, and he would fight Enrique Briones, and Bobby would choke him out with a guillotine choke just 48 seconds into the first round. And about 2 weeks after that, Bobby was on cloud 9 after getting back-to-back finishes. He went on to his third fight, not even 2 months after his first, and this fight was against Josh Gaskins. Josh would end up beating Bobby by unanimous decision. Most people would take a few months off, but Bobby isn't like most people. The very next day, Bobby would fight Herman Tirado and get right back in the win column and get right back into the win column by choking out Herman in the third round with another guillotine choke. In 2 weeks, Bobby would take his fifth pro fight against Raymond Villa. Once again, Bobby would get the submission win in the second round just 2 minutes in. After this, Bobby had some money and went from making his debut to having a record of 4 wins and 1 loss. And in June of 2008, Bobby would fight not 1, not 2, but 3 fights in 1 day. He would fight and beat Santiago Manzanares and win in a split decision fight. Then he would fight Israel Giron and knock him out in the first round less than 3 minutes in. And in his final fight of the night, Bobby would fight and knock out Rafael Salameo and knock him out as well just 4 minutes into the first round. After getting 3 wins in 1 night, Bobby would take 2 weeks off to train. And in July, Bobby would fight Toby Greer. Bobby would continue his win streak, knocking him out in the second round just 3 minutes in. So Bobby decided to take the rest of the year off and enjoy his earnings and relish on his life-changing career this far. In January, Bobby was just making his debut, and in 7 months, Bobby would have a record of 8 wins and 1 loss. In January of 2009, Bobby would fight Joe Lozon's brother, Dan Lozon. Unfortunately, Bobby didn't start the year with a win, because Dan would sink in a rear naked choke in the first round 4 minutes and 55 seconds in. After this tough loss, Bobby took a month off to recover, and in February, Bobby would fight John Eula and get in the win column. Bobby won this fight with a tight armbar. After this fight, Bobby would take a few months off, and in October, Bobby would fight Jeff Torch, and Bobby would continue his win streak, knocking out Torch in the first round just 1 minute in. And a little over a month after this scrap, Bobby would fight Sevak Magakayan, and Bobby would knock out Sevak in the first round just 2 minutes in. Bobby would fight a former UFC fighter, Dave Mitchell. Unfortunately, Bobby would lose his fight due to the infamous toe hold, just 54 seconds into the first round. After this blunder, Bobby would fight 2 weeks later. He would face off with the infamous and legendary Felony Charles Bennett, aka Crazy Horse. Bobby would dominate this fight and make short work of Crazy Horse by knocking him out 2 minutes into the first round. After this huge win over Crazy Horse, Bobby would fight a month later in a title fight against Ricky Legier Jr., and Bobby would reign supreme, once again knocking him out in the first round just 4 minutes in. And after grabbing his first belt, Bobby would take a few months off and eventually fight again in August of 2010. He would scrap with Darren Cruikshank. Bobby's win streak would continue, finishing his opponent by sinking in a nasty guillotine in the second round and successfully defend his title. 2 months later, Bobby would fight another future UFC fighter and veteran in Tim Means. Unfortunately, Bobby would lose by technical knockout at the end of round 2 and lose his title. Bobby felt defeated, but he didn't give up on himself. Bobby took almost a year off to work on his game and truly try to sharpen his weapons. And in April of 2011, Bobby would fight Dom O'Grady, and Bobby would win in impressive fashion by beating Dom in a 5-round fight by unanimous decision. This was another championship fight. After securing the belt for the second time, this was enough to get the attention of the famous, and at the time, biggest promotion, that being Strikeforce. In his Strikeforce debut, Bobby would fight Gessius Calicante, and Bobby would lose a razor-close fight in a split decision, but Bobby would take a few months off and regroup, and in his second fight in the promotion, Bobby would fight against Charon Spain, and Bobby would show the world that he was legit by choking out Spain in the second round. After getting his first win in the promotion, Bobby would fight a month later against JP Reese. He would show up and show out by choking out Reese in the third round with a rear naked choke. After this scrap, Bobby would take a few months off, and in May of 2012, Bobby would fight James Terry. This was another razor close scrap, but this time Bobby would win a split decision. Bobby would take a couple months off, and in August of 2012, he would fight Matt Ricehouse and win this scrap with Ricehouse by unanimous decision. Bobby was riding high after winning 3 in a row, and at this point, the UFC was skyrocketing in popularity and had enough money to purchase Strikeforce, along with Strikeforce's fighters. And in February of 2013, Bobby made his UFC debut against Jacob Volkman. Unlike his Strikeforce debut, Bobby would win this fight by syncing up a nasty rear naked choke in the last 30 seconds of the fight. So Bobby would take half a year off and would fight another infamous fighter, James Krause. Bobby's win streak would continue by finishing Krause with a nasty kick to the body just 3 minutes into the first round. After that impressive performance, Bobby set his sights on Pat Healy, and Bobby would reign supreme once again by beating Pat in a dominating decision win. So Bobby would fight a popular fighter and host of a popular podcast called Weighing In, and that fighter was Josh the Punk Thompson. This was Bobby's toughest fight to date, but Bobby would win in a razor-close fight, beating Josh in a 3-round war. Bobby was now in the rankings, and he would face absolute killers in his division. And in his next fight, he would fight a legend and Hall of Fame fighter, Edson Barboza. Unfortunately, Bobby's win streak ended there, because Bobby would lose by unanimous decision, so the UFC gave him a rising prospect and popular fighter, none other than Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Unfortunately, Bobby would get knocked out in the very first round, less than 3 minutes in. Now, we are in 2017, and Bobby would fight Rashid Magomedov. This was another razor-close fight, but Bobby wouldn't get the nod from the judges, and he lost by split decision. This was the worst streak Bobby has ever been on. He has lost 3 fights in a row, and at this point, Bobby hasn't won a fight in 3 years. So in October, Bobby would fight a prospect and underrated fighter, Orlando Venata. This was a fight for the ages and ended up being a split draw, with that being his one and only draw in his career. And in 3 months, Bobby would take on his next opponent, an Eric Coach, and Bobby would finally put together a performance to get him a win. And he did so by unanimous decision. After 4 years of losing, Bobby finally got a win. He would take on a young Drakkar Klose, but unfortunately, Klose was too much for Bobby. He would get dominated, and he ended up losing by unanimous decision. Bobby took a year off and would eventually fight Francisco Trinaldo, but Bobby's bad luck didn't end there, because Bobby would lose this fight the same way he did the last one, by unanimous decision. Bobby felt defeated, but Bobby never gave up on himself. So he would fight a few months later. He would fight a legendary fighter in Clay Guida, and Bobby would finally get another win by unanimous decision. After the war with Guida, he would get a rematch with Orlando Venata. This was when the virus that shut down the world was at its peak, and Bobby would turn out victorious by winning a unanimous decision. Bobby finally got back-to-back wins again and redeemed his one and only draw. In just a few months, Bobby got another fight with Alan Patrick, and once again, Bobby won by unanimous decision. After going on a 3-fight win streak, Bobby would fight a prospect in Thiago Moises. But Bobby's win streak was over because Bobby lost by unanimous decision. Bobby ended up taking a year off again, and when he returned, he would fight an absolute beast and prospect, Rafael Fiziev. Bobby would end up winning this fight, or Bobby would end up losing this fight, but he gave Rafael a tough fight. And in November of 2021, Bobby would fight Al Iaquinta, and Bobby would shock the fans by knocking out Al in the first round just 2 minutes in. Bobby was back and gained a ton of fans and became a star with this performance. And Bobby would fight again just 3 months later against another prospect in Nasrat Haqparast, and Bobby would style on Nasrat, beating him by unanimous decision. Now Bobby has a new fan base and has gained the respect of the fans because he had a very fun fighting style, along with a fun personality, and he was a veteran who was beating prospects. And if he wasn't beating him, he gave him a very tough fight. So the UFC fed Bobby to current champion and phenom, Islam Makhachev. Unfortunately, Bobby would get knocked out by Islam in the first round, just 3 minutes in. Bobby's next fight would be against another prospect and fan favorite Drew Dober. Unfortunately, Bobby would get knocked out again in the second round. This was the first time Bobby's chin was questionable, so they gave Bobby a winnable matchup and former opponent of Paddy, Jared Gordon. This fight ended up being a no contest because of an accidental clash of heads. This happened in the first round just 4 minutes in. After his one and only no contest, Bobby would fight another legend and fan favorite, that being Tony Ferguson. Bobby would prove he was the better veteran that night by submitting Ferguson in the third round with just 6 seconds left in the fight. Bobby was hyped up with the fans behind him, and he would fight an up-and-coming, undefeated prospect in Grant Dawson. On paper, this seemed like a cakewalk for Dawson because he was extremely dominant on the ground and had finished the majority of his fights. But this turned out a lot different than it seemed at the time, because Bobby would get the fastest finish of his career by knocking Dawson out cold just 30 seconds into the fight. The fans and media went nuts. The old dog took out the new dog. After that insane performance, Bobby would fight another up-and-coming prospect in Jalen Turner. But this didn't go the way we thought because Bobby would get knocked out less than 3 minutes in. And Bobby took a lot of unnecessary shots. And people, rightfully, thought Bobby's chin was gone because he took a career-changing amount of punishment. So much so that commentators and fans were pleading for the fight to stop. And in just 5 months, Bobby had recovered and taken on another opponent, and he would get an opportunity on one of the best cards in UFC history, the 300. Bobby would fight Jim Miller, another veteran who was adored by fans. People thought Bobby didn't have enough time to recover and thought he would get knocked out again due to his vicious knockout loss to Jalen Turner less than 6 months before. But Bobby has a knack for shocking the fans and the world because Bobby ended up putting a brutal beating on Miller, and Bobby would style on Miller from start to finish. However, Bobby did end up getting rocked a few times and got dropped, but he recovered fast and ended up winning by unanimous decision. After having one of the best fights on the card, with the exception of Yuri vs. Ratchik and Holloway vs. Gaethje, Bobby was in the conversation for Fight of the Night. And that brings us to another highly anticipated scrap with Paddy Pimblett. Bobby's record stands at 32 wins and 15 losses. Bobby has 11 wins by knockout, 9 submission wins, and 12 decision wins. He has a finishing percentage of 62%, which is great for a man with as many fights as he does. He has lost 5 fights by knockout and has been submitted 2 times as well. And he has lost 8 decisions, as well as 1 draw with Venata and 1 no contest with Jared Gordon. I think it goes without saying, Bobby is a legend and should be in a Hall of Fame by the time he retires. overall, I'm split on who I think will win this fight. Tell you who I want to win. I think Paddy has the potential to be a superstar and potentially the face of the UFC. I want to see Bobby expose Pimblett and put on another masterclass similar to the Miller performance. But let's be honest, that's pretty wishful thinking considering Bobby's age, and this Pimblett fight will be his 50th fight. But if anyone can knock out Paddy and break his will for war, that man is Bobby Green. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as it's the only way to support the channel. And as always, I hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the fights. Bye.